Russia had a major intelligence failure, inappropriate weapons, and didn't send enough force. The basic weakness of the Russian army is a lack of sergeants. This is a nuanced war, a complex war, choreographed by the Americans. I won't say that the Pentagon has a lot to do with the planning, but what the hell. The Russians have a ground problem. It's a battle problem of the infantry. The Chinese problem is a naval problem. Because China has had a massive economic downturn. The United States is crazy, but it holds together. And therefore, the Chinese are in deep trouble. Their problem is domestic. If you go to Shanghai and you drive 30 miles west of the city, you see poverty like you've never seen before. So what you have is China in tremendous trouble. We are now in a war which does not in any way involve China. In fact, the Chinese abstained when the UN voted on condemning Russia. Now that's a big deal because your allies are forever, like a marriage, you don't abstain, you go vote right. They didn't. This was your basic screw you to Russia, if there needed to be one. So now Russia is sitting there. What do you do in this situation? You declare that you're insane because ever you get into a bar fight, pretend to be insane. Okay? And he's been in bar fights, and he is. I'm going to nuke you. I'm going to use dirty nukes in you. I'm going to nuke your mother. I'm everybody that I can nuke. He's not an idiot. He knows that he's going to turn into radioactive dust personally if he does this. He knows that's not an option. Why does he do it? Here's where we get perspective. We have to stay calm. You have to say, he's doing it because his back's against the wall and he's got to do something. Be calm, which is not what we're good at, but this is what's going on there. Okay, so Russia had a major intelligence failure, inappropriate weapons, and didn't send enough force. His final problem is that he's had to Dragoon, I won't call, not subscription, Dragoon an army. He's out of an army. The one problem that he has is training an army. It's one thing having in your camp. How do you train the infantryman? I think it would take about 6 months before somebody goes through AIT. The Russians are going to send completely untrained troops into combat. Well, no, they're not. But they've done this because they had to. The basic weakness of the Russian army is a lack of sergeants. What I mean by this is the Chinese have sergeants. The British, God knows, have sergeants. Scary. The Americans, I can tell you a story about Fort Bragg, but it wasn't pretty. We have trainers. We have experienced forces who have been in combat, hopefully. But even if they haven't, they understand the basic principles of tactical warfare. And for 3 months, it's pounded into their heads till they never want to think of that day again. The Russians do not have sergeants. They have lieutenants who have been in 6 months, who are assigned to train people who have been there no months. This is why the Russian army performs badly. It has never had a coherent training program. Why? Because in World War II, they didn't have the time for it. And because they didn't have the time for it, they sent them in to die. And it was not kidding. The best they could do to hold the Russians, to hold the Germans, I should say, was hit them again, and take the casualties. But this is a nuanced war, a complex war, choreographed by the Americans. I won't say that the Pentagon has a lot to do with the planning, but what the hell. This is planned for it. It's with a force that's highly motivated, totally committed, and knows that it has the United States at its back, and the British at its back. Even the Germans at its back, but they you don't trust. Okay, so this is the problem of the Germans. It's not clear how the Russians can win. Russia has to have a peace treaty because its option is nuclear war or a peace settlement. It cannot win. Its forces are not in a position to win. They can take them in, they can spend all winter training them, and that may have some effect, but basically they have an untrained force fighting a highly motivated force backed up by the superb technologies that are available today. So, this is the Russian situation. The Russians have a ground problem. It's a battle problem of the infantry. The Chinese problem is a naval problem. Yes, I know they go all the way back to Tibet and everything. Their problem is a naval problem. They are boxed in by the South China Sea. But there's a different problem, which is China has had a massive economic downturn. And everybody's waiting for it to improve. But it won't. And this is the critical thing about China. The United States was China in 1900. We had the Civil War. It was a disaster. We got low wages. We exported like crazy. And by the time of 1900, we produced 1/2 of all the industrial goods in the world. And everybody said they were going to take over the world. To which the answer was, not yet. Because what happened was Europe had one of its wars. They came out of it unable to consume our products. They couldn't take the exports that they had before. The United States had a financial crisis that turned into the Great Depression in 1929. Japan was in a very similar situation. Hiroshima Nagasaki had not done any good to its morale. It was a disaster. And what happened was the Korean War. The United States during the Korean War had to get hold of trucks, maybe 100, 200. Because sending back to Detroit would be ridiculous. So I went to a little company in Japan and says, can you build a tank? They said, oh, no problem, build a tank. The name of the company was Toyota. And that was how Toyota began. And the next thing Toyota did was swamp the American market with inexpensive cars, undercutting the American market. And Japan soared with all these exports coming into hungry markets. And Japan looked like we were all going to be speaking Japanese, standing around holding hands and having quality corners and everything like that. I mean, movies were made about how Japan was taking us over. And then what happened was that Japan ran out of customers. A lot of customers, like the Americans, said, cut it out, you're killing our auto industry. We're not buying anymore. Other countries pushed back in this way, that way. And what happened to Japan in 1991? It collapsed. Its economy collapsed. Now, the United States is crazy, but it holds together. The Japanese are crazy and never go apart. Now we get to China. China had one of the most extraordinary economic explosions in history, on the order of the American and the Japanese. So we've seen this before. And this is the basic problem of export-oriented economies. You can say, wow, they've taken over a country and everything else. No, what's going to happen is they run out of room to grow. Countries like the United States block their exports. They go down. So what Japan happened to Japan a couple of years ago, it went into China went into a nosedive. It went into an economic nosedive that it can't recover from because its economy is based on powerful exports and Western investment in its businesses. And that's not going to happen again because the rest of the world is also in recession, or about to be, whatever Biden decides we are. We're in this economic problem. We cannot float the Chinese, and therefore the Chinese are in deep trouble. Their problem is domestic. Their problem is that there are vast parts of China that never experienced growth. If you go to Shanghai and you drive 30 miles west of the city, you see poverty like you've never seen before. The coastal region that trades with the rest of the world does fine. The rest of the country really doesn't. And so, we can say, because I'm an expert in this field, that Chinese people are really upset with poverty. Okay? I've studied this. And so what you have is a political crisis emerging. And in that political crisis emerging, the former president gets led out of the building by horse. Why? Because he was a successful president, not because he personally, it was just he got the right time. Xi can't admit that he's hosed, so he has to find somebody else. Poor Hu is let out of the room, and we won't see him again for a while, maybe. So what you have is China in tremendous trouble. Now the question comes up, will they invade Taiwan? What do they want with Taiwan? What problem will holding Taiwan solve? What does that do for you? It makes you feel good for a couple of days, but then everybody's out there. Plus, how do you invade Taiwan? Taiwan is an amphibious operation. And here I am at the Naval Institute, so I will not tell you how hard it is to conduct amphibious operations over a distance that takes you at least 9 hours to reach in mass force Taiwan. And how many ways U.S. satellites can pick up the movement, and how many ways can submarines, missiles, whatever you want, think about. What is China's fundamental fear? The one they never express. That we will mine their harbors. If the United States mines their harbors, China is an exporting power and importing power. We can block China over all sorts of reasons. I once said this to a senior Chinese officer, and he said, but you can't use submarines in the South China Sea. What do I know? So, okay, what do you think we will use? How about aircraft dropping mines? How's that work for you?